Hello and welcome to The Unfinished Man. I'm Alexa.
And I'm Sam. Today, we're delving into the story of a man who stared into the abyss of a meaningless universe and told us to be happy. A writer, a philosopher, a resistance fighter, and a Nobel laureate.
Albert Camus. His name is synonymous with the stranger, the myth of Sisyphus, and the philosophy of the absurd. He was a voice for a generation disillusioned by war and searching for truth.
But his own life was a tapestry of contradictions. A man who wrote about morality, yet was embroiled in personal turmoil. A champion of life who died suddenly, violently, and under circumstances that some believe were anything but an accident.
This is the story of Albert Camus. From the sun-drenched poverty of Algeria to the icy crash on a French country road. A story of triumph, tragedy, and an enduring mystery.
So let's begin at the end, on a cold January day in 1960. Part 1, The Crash, January 4th, 1960.
It's a Monday. The Christmas holidays are over, and Albert Camus, at the peak of his fame, is traveling back to Paris from the south of France. He's 46 years old, a Nobel Prize winner, an international literary celebrity. He's in a Facile Vega, a powerful, luxurious French sports car, a symbol of his success. His publisher and friend, Michel Gallimard, is at the wheel.
This is just a few years after he won the Nobel. He was arguably the most famous writer in France, maybe the world. What was his state of mind?
By all accounts, he was tired. The Nobel Prize in 1957 was both a crown and a curse. He called it the catastrophe of fame. He was embroiled in bitter political fights, particularly with his former friend, Jean-Paul Sartre, over communism and the Algerian War, a conflict that tore him apart personally. He'd told friends he felt drained, that the prize had frozen him. He was struggling to write. This car journey was supposed to be a respite.
So they're driving north towards Paris. The details of the crash itself are stark.
They are. Around 1:55 p.m., near the town of Villeblevin, the car leaves the road. Witnesses said it was traveling at high speed. It swerves, skids, and slams into a plane tree, one of those giant ancient trees that line French roads. The impact is catastrophic. Camus is killed instantly. His neck is broken, his skull fractured. Michel Gallimard dies a few days later. The only survivor is Gallimard's wife and daughter, who were following in another car.
An open and shut case, it would seem. A tragic car accident. A famous man, a fast car, a moment of distraction, or a blown tire. The world mourned. But almost immediately, the whispers started. Why?
The first and most persistent piece of evidence is a train ticket, found in the pocket of Camus' coat, a return train ticket from Provence to Paris.
Wait, he had a train ticket? But he chose to drive.
Precisely. The story from his family was that he'd taken the train down to the south, but at the last minute, Michel Gallimard had persuaded him to drive back in the Facile Vega for a more comfortable, direct journey. But why was the return ticket still in his pocket? It suggests a last-minute, impulsive change of plan, or something else.
It's the first loose thread, and when you start pulling it, the whole story begins to unravel. Let's talk about the theories. The most prominent one involves the KGB.
Right. This theory was given serious weight in 2011 when an Italian academic and a former Italian newspaper editor published an article citing a passage from the diary of the Czech poet and translator Jan Zabrana.
And what did Zabrana say?
He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, "I heard something very different from a man who knew lots of things. The KGB was behind the death of Camus." The claim was that the Soviet Secret Service had rigged the car, tampering with the tires, as a retaliation for Camus' fierce and very public anti-communist stance.
This wasn't just a philosophical disagreement. Camus had broken with Sartre over this. He condemned the Soviet labor camps in The Rebel. He was a staunch critic of totalitarianism, both fascist and communist. He was a powerful voice for the West during the Cold War.
Exactly. Silencing him would have been a significant propaganda victory for the Soviets. And the KGB had a known history of carrying out wet affairs or assassinations abroad. But there are problems with this theory. Why such a public, messy method? A car crash is notoriously unreliable. Why not a quieter poisoning, something that could be passed off as the heart attack?
It's a compelling but circumstantial theory. Then there's another angle, closer to home, the Algerian War.
This was the conflict that caused Camus the most personal anguish. He was born in Algeria. He was a pied noir, a French Algerian. He loved his homeland. He condemned the violence of the French colonial regime, but he also condemned the terrorist tactics of the FLN, the Algerian independence fighters. He was caught in the middle.
He famously said, "I believe in justice, but I will defend my mother before justice." He was saying that if his mother, who still lived in Algiers, were threatened by a bomb, he would have to side with her safety over an abstract political ideal. This alienated him from the leftist intellectuals in Paris who saw independence as an absolute moral good.
So the theory goes that he had enemies on both sides. The far-right French militants in Algeria saw him as a traitor for his criticism of colonialism. The FLN saw him as an enemy for not fully endorsing their cause. Either side could have had a motive to eliminate him.
But again, concrete proof is elusive. It remains in the realm of speculation. The official cause of death remains an accident, but the train ticket, the political climate, the sheer suddenness of it all, it creates a cloud of suspicion that has never fully dissipated.
It's the final, absurd act in the life of the philosopher of the absurd. A man who wrote so much about death, about chance, about the meaningless randomness of fate, being erased in a single random moment on a country road. Or was it random? That's the question that haunts his legacy. To understand the weight of his death, we have to go back to the beginning, to the sun, the sea, and the profound poverty that shaped him. Part 2, The Sun and the Silence. Childhood in Algeria. Albert Camus was born on November 7, 1913, in Mondovi, Algeria. His father, Lucien, was a cellarman for a wine company. His mother, Catherine, was a cleaner of Spanish descent. He barely knew his father.
World War I broke out less than a year after he was born.
Yes, Lucien Camus was mobilized and sent to the Battle of the Marne. He was wounded, evacuated, and died of his wounds in October 1914. Albert was not even a year old. The official notification sent to the family contained a single devastating sentence about his father. The said Camus, Lucien, has died for France. That was it. That was all young Albert would ever officially know of the man.
So, from the very start, his life is marked by absence and by the sheer impersonal machinery of history and death. This wasn't a personal tragedy, it was an administrative one, a line in a ledger.
Exactly. And this had immediate, dire consequences for the family. Catherine Camus, now a widow with 2 young sons, Albert and his older brother Lucien, was left with no income. She was also partially deaf and had a speech impediment. She was functionally illiterate. To survive, she moved the family into a small 3-room apartment in the working-class district of Belcourt, Algiers, to live with her mother and her domineering brother, Etienne, who was a cooper, a barrel maker.
Describe this household for us, Alexa, because it's crucial to understanding Camus' entire worldview.
It was a world of sensory extremes. Outside, the overwhelming, brilliant Algerian sun, the heat, the vibrant, chaotic life of the streets. Inside, a world of shadows and silence. His mother, worn out by factory work, was emotionally distant, often sitting for hours just staring into space. The dominant figure was his grandmother, a harsh, authoritarian woman who ruled the household with a whip. She was not a source of comfort, but of discipline and severity. Poverty was a constant. There were no books, no art. The focus was on survival.
So where did the spark of intellect come from? How does a boy from this environment become one of the great literary minds of the century?
It came in the form of a single pivotal figure, his primary school teacher, Louis Germain.
The man to whom he would later dedicate his Nobel Prize speech.
Precisely. Germain saw something in the quiet, bright boy. He encouraged him, gave him extra lessons, and most importantly, he fought for him. When it was time for Albert to go to secondary school, his grandmother declared it was over. He was to leave school, get a job, and bring money into the household. Education was a luxury they couldn't afford.
This is a moment where a life can be completely derailed.
Absolutely. Louis Germain went to the apartment. He confronted the grandmother. He argued, he pleaded, he secured a scholarship for Albert. He literally went to the house and shamed the family into letting the boy continue his education. Camus would later write to him, "Without you, without the affectionate hand you extended to the small, poor child that I was, without your teaching and your example, none of this would have happened." It's no exaggeration to say Louis Germain saved Albert Camus.
So he goes to the lycée, the high school, and this is where the world opens up. He discovers philosophy, literature, but there's another, more physical passion that defined his youth.
Football, soccer. Camus was a gifted and passionate goalkeeper. He played for the Racing Universitaire d'Algiers youth team. He later said that all the morality, all the ethics he would ever need, he learned on the football pitch. About teamwork, about boundaries, about solidarity, about the sheer physical joy of existence under the sun.
It's a powerful image. The young philosopher as a goalkeeper, the last line of defense, alone in his position, but integral to the team. It's a perfect metaphor for his later sense of individual responsibility within a collective.
And then, at the age of 17, another random, brutal blow of fate. He collapses. He spits blood. The diagnosis, tuberculosis. In the 1930s, there was no cure. It was a wasting, often fatal disease.
His football career is over, just like that.
Instantly. The doctors tell him his lungs are too damaged. He will live with the effects of TB for the rest of his life. It's a constant reminder of his own mortality, of the fragility of the body he so cherished. The sun, the sea, physical exertion, these were his sources of joy. And now one of them was permanently taken from him. This confrontation with a meaningless, debilitating illness would become the bedrock of his philosophy of the absurd. Part 3. The Stranger and the Lover. Early Relationships and the Stranger.
So we have the young Camus, a brilliant scholar, a former athlete, marked by poverty and disease. And now he enters the world of literature and, just as importantly, the complicated world of love.
His first great, tumultuous love was Simone He. She was beautiful, intelligent, from a wealthy family, and like many in their bohemian circle in Algiers, she was a user of drugs, specifically morphine.
Camus was captivated. They married in 1934 when he was just 20. It was a disaster almost from the start.
Simone's addiction consumed her. Camus, ever the moralist, tried to save her. He worked tirelessly, taking on multiple jobs to pay for her drugs, trying to find cures. He saw it as a battle for her soul, but he couldn't win. She was repeatedly unfaithful, and the relationship was a source of immense pain and humiliation for him. They separated in 1936 and eventually divorced.
This experience is profoundly formative. It's his first real, intimate encounter with a kind of moral chaos that he couldn't rationalize or control. It shatters any naive idealism he might have had.
And it feeds directly into his writing. You can see the disillusionment, the cold observation of human frailty in his early works. But out of this personal failure, his literary life begins to flourish. He starts a theater group, Théâtre del Travail, writes plays, essays, and begins working as a journalist.
He also joins the Communist Party for a time, out of a sense of solidarity with the oppressed, particularly the Arab population in Algeria, but he was never a doctrinaire communist. He was too much of an individualist, too skeptical of all systems.
He leaves the party within a couple of years. This pattern would repeat throughout his life. Initial engagement, followed by disillusionment when the ideology demanded the sacrifice of individual conscience.
Now, let's fast forward to 1942. France is under Nazi occupation. Camus is in Paris working for the resistance newspaper Combat, and he publishes 2 books that will make him famous: the novel The Stranger and the philosophical essay The Myth of Sisyphus.
These 2 works are twin pillars of his philosophy of the absurd. Let's take The Stranger first. Sam, give us the premise.
It's the story of Meursault, a clerk in Algiers. The book opens with the most famous first line in French literature: "Mother died today," or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure. He attends his mother's funeral, but shows no outward sign of grief. He doesn't cry. The next day, he goes to the beach, starts a relationship with a woman, sees a comedy film. He's detached, emotionally neutral. Then, on a sun-drenched beach, in a moment of disorientation and heat, he commits a senseless murder. He shoots an Arab man.
The second half of the book is his trial, but the trial isn't really about the murder. It's about his character. The prosecutor condemns him not for killing a man, but for not crying at his mother's funeral. He is condemned for being an outsider, for not playing the social game, for being a stranger to the expected human emotions. He is sentenced to death not for his crime, but for his indifference.
This is the heart of the absurd. Society demands a narrative. It demands meaning, remorse, tears. Meursault cannot provide them. He's honest about the randomness of his act. He's on trial for failing to lie, for failing to pretend that life makes sense. In the end, facing execution, he has an epiphany. He realizes the universe is as indifferent to him as he was to his mother, and he opens himself to the benign indifference of the universe, finding a strange, cold peace.
It's a staggering, revolutionary book, and it came out of Camus' own experience. The silence of his mother, the oppressive Algerian sun, the feeling of being an outsider even in his own homeland. Meursault was an extreme version, a philosophical construct, but he is born from the soil of Camus' life.
And paired with it is the myth of Sisyphus, which lays out the philosophy explicitly. Its famous opening line is, "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide."
Camus defines the absurd as the confrontation between the human need for meaning, clarity, and purpose, and the universe's complete and utter silence, its irrationality and indifference. We are meaning-making creatures trapped in a meaningless world. This is the fundamental conflict.
So what do we do? Suicide is one answer, but Camus rejects it. That is merely accepting the defeat. Religious faith is another, which he calls philosophical suicide, a leap of faith to avoid the problem. He rejects that too.
So what's left? We must revolt. We must accept the absurd and live in spite of it. And this is where Sisyphus comes in. In Greek myths, Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a mountain for eternity. Every time he gets near the top, the boulder rolls back down. It is the epitome of a futile, meaningless task. But Camus reinterprets this. He says we must imagine Sisyphus happy. The moment Sisyphus walks back down the mountain to begin his task again, he is conscious of his fate. He owns it. His revolt is his consciousness. His freedom is in his scorn for the gods and his dedication to his own meaningless task. He finds meaning not in the goal, but in the struggle itself.
This is the core of Camus' message. In a world without God, without inherent meaning, our rebellion is to live, to love, to create, to feel the sun on our skin, to be passionately engaged in life, all the while carrying the weight of the knowledge that it is, ultimately, meaningless. It's a philosophy of lucid, passionate defiance.
Part 4. A Heart Divided. War, Politics, and Personal Turmoil.
So, Camus is now a celebrated author, a hero of the French resistance. After the war, he's a moral voice for a new France, and he enters the most intense and most public intellectual feud of the 20th century with Jean-Paul Sartre.
It's important to understand their initial relationship. They were friends, comrades. They met in occupied Paris. They were the twin kings of existentialist Paris, drinking in the cafes of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. But their philosophies were fundamentally different.
Sartre believed in a radical, almost unlimited freedom. Man is condemned to be free, he said. For Sartre, since there is no God to give us a purpose, we are entirely responsible for creating our own values through our choices and actions. And this extended to politics. For Sartre, if you were an intellectual, you had to be engagé, committed. You had to take a side. And in the post-war world, for Sartre and his circle, that side was Marxism. The Soviet Union, for all its flaws, represented the vanguard of the proletariat, the hope for a future without class oppression. To criticize it was to side with the bourgeoisie, with the oppressors.
Camus, this is where Camus broke. In 1951, he published his next great philosophical work, The Rebel.
This is the book that ended his friendship with Sartre.
In The Rebel, Camus traces the history of rebellion from the French Revolution to the 20th century. His central argument is that true rebellion is a protest against injustice in the name of a value, human dignity, for example. But when rebellion becomes institutionalized, when it becomes a revolution, it inevitably betrays its original ideals. It creates new gods, new absolutes, and in the name of those absolutes, it begins to justify terror and murder. The French Revolution led to the terror. The Marxist Revolution led to the Gulag.
So Camus was saying, I am a rebel, but I am not a revolutionary. He condemned all forms of totalitarianism, all systems that sacrifice human lives on the altar of a historical abstraction, whether it's the Führer or the dictatorship of the proletariat. He called for a politics of limits, of moderation, of mesura.
Sartre's journal, Les Temps Modernes, assigned a young protégé, Francis Jensen, to review the book. The review was a brutal, personal attack. It accused Camus of being a moralistic, beautiful soul, divorced from the real political struggles of history, a philosopher of the police.
Camus was deeply wounded. He wrote a long, pained reply directly to Sartre, and Sartre's response was one of the most vicious and brilliant public letters ever written. He dismantled Camus' position, mocked his self-righteousness, and ended their friendship forever. He wrote, "My dear Camus, our friendship was not easy, but I will miss it." It was a public execution. The Parisian intellectual world largely sided with Sartre. Camus was isolated, heartbroken. He felt he was being punished for saying that murder is murder, no matter who commits it.
And this political isolation was mirrored by an even more painful personal conflict, the Algerian War, which broke out in 1954.
This tore him in two. He was a Frenchman, but Algeria was his motherland. He believed in justice for the Arab and Berber population and had long criticized the colonial system, but he couldn't endorse the FLN's tactics of targeting civilians. And he couldn't abandon the Pied Noir community, which included his own mother and family.
His famous statement, "I believe in justice, but I will defend my mother before justice," was widely misunderstood. He wasn't saying he didn't care about justice. He was saying that when an abstract political cause demands you sacrifice your own flesh and blood, the choice becomes impossible. It's a choice between two loyalties, two loves. He proposed a civilian truce, a plea to spare non-combatants on both sides. It was ignored. He fell into a deep silence on the issue, criticized by the right for being too soft and by the left for being a colonialist. It was the great failure of his public life, and it caused him immense private suffering.
And through all this public strife, his private life was a mirror of its own contradictions. After his divorce with Simone, he had a long, turbulent relationship with the mathematician and pianist Francine Faure.
Francine was the opposite of Simone. She was stable, grounded, intelligent. They married in 1940, and she would bear him twins, Catherine and John. Camus loved her, and he loved the idea of a stable family life. It was his anchor, but he was also incapable of fidelity.
We have to talk about his affairs. They are a central and troubling part of his story. The most significant was with Maria Casares.
Maria Casares was a force of nature, a brilliant, fiery Spanish-born actress. They met in 1944, and it was an immediate, explosive connection. They were kindred spirits, passionate, intense, artistic. But their affair was interrupted when Camus went back to Algeria to be with Francine.
When he returned to Paris, married, the affair reignited, and it continued for years, a passionate, open secret. Francine knew. She was devastated. In 1949, she suffered a severe breakdown and was hospitalized.
Camus was racked with guilt. He was torn between his love for Francine and the children, and his irresistible passion for Maria. He wrote in his notebooks about this split, this duality within himself. He craved the comfort of the hearth and the fiery passion of the stage. He couldn't choose, and in not choosing, he caused immense pain.
There were other affairs too, most notably with the young American-born writer Patricia Blake and a deeply intense relationship with the Danish philosopher and translator Else Schoenemann. He seemed to need multiple sources of love, of admiration, of confirmation.
It's the great contradiction of the moralist. The man who wrote so powerfully about integrity, about rebellion against injustice, was often incapable of moral integrity in his most intimate relationships. He was a man of yes and no, constantly at war with himself. He was, as one biographer put it, a happy Sisyphus, but his happiness came at a cost to those around him. Part 5. The Noble and the End.
In the midst of this personal and political turmoil, in October 1957, the phone rings. Albert Camus, at 44, is the second youngest person ever to win the Nobel Prize in Literature.
The announcement praised him for his important literary production, which, with clear-sighted earnestness, illuminates the problems of the human conscience in our times. It was a global affirmation, but for Camus, it was a shock. He thought the prize should have gone to André Malraux. He was deeply ambivalent.
Why? This is the highest honor a writer can receive.
He saw it as a tombstone. He told a friend it was a catastrophe. He was young, he felt. He had so much more to write. Now he was being treated like a monument. The pressure was immense. Every word he wrote from now on would be that of a Nobel laureate. He also felt it heightened the expectations for him to speak on every political issue, especially Algeria, where he felt he had nothing left to say that wouldn't be twisted.
He gave a magnificent acceptance speech in Stockholm, however. He spoke about the role of the artist, about the need for truth and freedom, but the event was also marred by the Algerian question. During a Q&A, a young Algerian student confronted him, demanding to know why he wasn't supporting independence more strongly.
Camus lost his composure. He famously snapped, "I have always condemned terror. I must also condemn the terrorism that is carried out blindly in the streets of Algiers, for example, and which one day could strike my mother or my family. I believe in justice, but I will defend my mother before justice." It was an honest, human cry of pain, but in the press, it was portrayed as a reactionary statement.
The prize, which should have been a celebration, ended up isolating him further. The next 2 years were fallow. He struggled to write. He worked on his great unfinished novel, The First Man, an autobiographical work about his childhood, a return to the sun and silence of Algeria. It was an attempt to go back to his roots, to find his voice again.
And that's where we find him in the final days of 1959. He's staying at the home of his publisher, Michel Gallimard, in Le Marin, in the south of France. He's taken a break, trying to rest and write. He's planning to take the train back to Paris.
But Michel Gallimard suggests they drive, in his powerful, comfortable Facel Vega. It'll be quicker, more direct. Camus, tired, agrees.
And so, on January 3, 1960, they set off. We know Camus hated fast cars. He was a nervous passenger. He once said the most absurd way to die would be in a car crash. The irony is almost too heavy to bear.
The journey is uneventful. They stop for the night. The next day, January 4th, they continue. Michelle is driving. The road is straight, but it's cold, maybe icy. The car, a powerful beast, is difficult to handle.
And then, on that straight stretch near Villeblevin, it happens. The car veers. It's over in seconds. The impact with the plane tree is violent and final. In Camus' pocket, they find the unused train ticket. In the wreckage, they find his briefcase. Inside it, the manuscript of The First Man, 144 handwritten pages, an unfinished life, and an unfinished book.
Part 6. The Unfinished Man. Legacy. So, we're left with the questions. Accident or something more sinister?
The official investigation concluded it was an accident. A tire may have blown, or Gallimard, who was not an experienced driver of such a powerful car, simply lost control. The KGB theory, while tantalizing, lacks hard evidence. The Algerian angle is similarly speculative. Perhaps the simplest explanation is the truest, a random, meaningless accident.
And for the philosopher of the absurd, isn't that the most fitting end? Not a grand conspiracy, not a political martyrdom, but a random event on a cold road, the ultimate demonstration of the universe's indifference.
It's the final, brutal lesson of his own philosophy. The boulder rolls back down, crushing him. The universe is indeed benignly indifferent.
But his work, Alexa, his work was anything but indifferent. What is the legacy of Albert Camus?
His legacy is immense. The Stranger remains a cornerstone of modern literature, taught in schools worldwide. The myth of Sisyphus is a foundational text for anyone grappling with the question of meaning in a secular age. In a world of rising fundamentalisms, of polarized politics, his call for moderation, for nuance, for a rebellion that does not become a new tyranny is more relevant than ever.
He gives us a way to live without lies, without pretending there is a God or a historical inevitability that will save us and give our lives meaning. He forces us to confront the emptiness. And then, miraculously, he tells us to be happy, to find our meaning in the struggle itself, in love, in beauty, in solidarity, in the simple, sensual pleasures of existence.
He was a flawed man, a divided man, a moralist who couldn't always live up to his own morals, a lover who caused pain, a political voice who was silenced by an impossible conflict. But in his writing, he achieved a clarity and a courage that continues to inspire. He looked into the void and told us to keep rolling the boulder and to find joy in the effort.
He remains, as his unfinished autobiography was titled, The First Man, starting from zero, with no father, no inherited truth, forced to create his own values, his own meaning, under the vast, silent sky.
Albert Camus died on January 4th, 1960, but his rebellion continues.
Thank you for listening to The Unfinished Man.
Join us next time.